Get started, as always, we'll have a little bit of housekeeping, a couple announcements. The first announcement is just a reminder for everybody that the Concourse de Elegance et Kapschelholm will be July 13th. The gates open at 10 a.m. for those of you who made it last year, those of you who didn't. It's an exceptional event with 11 classes of automobiles set against the Oliver Mansion next door. There will be educational programs like the Studebaker Design Studio, where you can actually engage with real automotive designers, former automotive designers, and they'll actually take you through what is a simulation of Loewy's Design Studio, and you'll finish by actually designing your own radiator mascot for a Studebaker vehicle. So some really exciting hands-on things. Some of the cars that will be in attendance is the first Studebaker president to win first of any Studebakers to win a class at Pebble Beach, Will Chamberlain's personal Ghia, and for those of you who are Lincoln Highway aficionados here, Henry Joy's personal Packard. Henry Joy, one of the developers of the Lincoln Highway. So really an impressive selection of vehicles that will be here on July 13th. If any of you know any children who would like to participate in the junior judging program, we have a few limited spots left. Maria's out today, so we have Mia who will be substituting in, and we'll introduce her at the end of the program. She will be the person to see this at the end of this program for any information related to the handouts or getting on the email sign-up list. The next announcement is a reminder that the next edition, the first Cars and Coffee, happened about 2 weeks ago. The second Cars and Coffee will be July 6th. The first was a tremendous success with over 50 vehicles out and over 100 attendees. We look forward to continue growing that. Come on down with any classic or new car that you have. Enjoy some free coffee and donuts and free access to the Studebaker Museum for the morning. The July installment of the speaker series dovetails very nicely with this program. It's what happens when you actually get to keep a landmark around. The program is titled A Landmark Revival and will feature local historic preservation specialist Todd Zeiger of Indiana Landmarks, Alicia Fiesel of the Historic Preservation Committee, and Vicki McIntyre, who will be speaking about the Studebaker Fountain Project. That program will be July 17th, right back here at 1:30 p.m. There's a complete list of our public program series which will be available afterwards. Now, all of you are here to see Andy today. We all know Andy very well. He is the archivist at the Studebaker National Museum. It's the first time I get to say this when introducing him, but he has now been here for over 20 years on the staff of the museum, making him the longest tenured. Many of you also know him through his monthly columns in Turning Wheels or his entries in other automotive publications. He's also just got done serving as the president of the Society of Automotive Historians, and his work has earned him some distinguished awards, including the Minnie Barnes Award from the Studebaker Drivers Club and the Spirit of Studebaker Award from the Studebaker National Museum this spring. Without any further ado, Andy Beckman.
Thank you very much, Matt. Can everyone hear me all right? Yep. Wonderful. Okay, how many of you were here for the Studebaker Buildings of Champions program last year? All right, almost a completely new crowd. Wonderful. You know, I won't feel that bad about repeating some of the things in this program here. But to get going here, our Studebaker's Lost Landmarks. As the name implies, these are structures that are no longer with us, and I'm sorry, the last slide in most of the segments is going to be a little depressing, so I just kind of want to brace yourself for that moving forward here. But you know, it's also looking towards as Studebaker as a company was evolving, and because sometimes these landmarks we're going to look at here gave way to newer, better facilities that allowed them to really advance their product line. And we're also going to take a look at some of the some residential facilities and a few other interesting pieces along the way. I believe our press release, our email blast touted a couple of surprises, so hopefully some things that maybe folks were not aware of before. So we're going to start with the Studebaker Carriage Factory downtown South Bend, and one of my favorite new words I learned putting this one together, it's not a factory, it's a manufactory. Try to work that into your conversation at least once a week. I'm sure you influence friends and people. As you see this note here, it says 1876 is written on there. Now this is an artist's rendition of what they wanted you to think the Studebaker carriage factory actually looked like. If only they had a flag that apparently was borrowed from the Pentagon, and you know, these wonderful graphics on here, not to mention a spire that is probably nicer than we've ever seen on any other structure in downtown South Bend, and people happily cavorting along Michigan and Jefferson streets in what we would hope are Studebaker carriages. Well, this particular site, this is over here, the corner of Michigan and Jefferson streets in downtown South Bend. That's ground zero for Studebaker history. Henry and Clem founded their blacksmith shop on that corner. Later they expanded into building their carriages and built this very nice factory that opened about 1873. This is closer to what it actually looked like. No embellishments there. Studebaker opened this building in 1874. It's described as being a dark brick building built for the Studebaker Carriage Works, and it was called the Studebaker Block. And you can just see it up here in the cornice molding up there. The Studebaker Block was actually mostly under the control of Jacob Studebaker. He was the youngest brother. He had taken several classes at a small Catholic school north of South Bend and was later put in charge of Studebaker's entire carriage manufacturing division. Well, Studebaker was growing great guns in the the late 19th century, and they quickly outgrew this. They had to really look at expanding their plant that was on the outskirts of town on the southwest side, the Studebaker corridor we're familiar with today. But Studebaker continued to maintain a production presence in South Bend until the early 1890s. And the insurance maps, this is a wonderful online site where you can actually go through and check details about these buildings if you're wondering what was actually done there. And since I have the cordless mic here, I'm going to walk around a bit. If I'm in someone's way, I apologize ahead of time. But we say the Studebaker block was really much more than just the two buildings on the corner. This almost entire block was dedicated to Studebaker's carriage manufacturing. See the storage and stock room to the south here. Just again, north is oriented as you would expect it to. Jefferson here. This is Michigan Street. Chicory Cafe is right over here, and the Studebaker Plaza sits there today. But the stock room over here, we have the boxing room where carriages would be shipped out, trimming and painting works, and really all the carriage production for the first really couple decades of Studebaker with a larger factory took place right on that site. As we mentioned, Studebaker outgrew this property pretty quickly, and even though Studebaker was not keeping it in use as a production facility, it still hung on to the property until about 1912. At that time, the Studebakers realized they didn't need their downtown property anymore, and it was deeded to Mr. Sebastian Kresge with the department store of the same name. And you'll notice a couple details here. You'll see this picture is really very similar. We think this is about 1905 or so. The picture, of course, is undated, but you'll see, even though we have some vehicles on the streets, I don't see any automobiles out there. See, the building is kind of as we saw in the earlier picture here, but notice the details of the Studebaker block cornice up here are still intact. But we go to this postcard photo from 1909. At least that's what the postmark on the photo was. It may have been on the postcard was. It could have been a year or two earlier. We see the Studebaker block identification is gone. They've modernized the building next to it to make it, got rid of the mansard roof to really make it look more as one building. And again, 1990, still, what don't you see on the streets of South Bend here? You see lots of rail lines, but no automobiles just yet either. Now, some of you may be wondering, how on earth did they take this photograph here? Because let's face it, air photography was probably, since the airplane was only invented just a few years earlier, anyone care to guess how they got this photograph? From the standpipe. And we'll be talking about the standpipe in just a minute here, but the South Bend's big landmark standpipe, which sat kind of in the southwest corner of the Century Center parking lot, would have been the ideal vantage point to take this picture. And this is how the building, I'm sure for many of you who remember the Kresge building, this is kind of the appearance you see. You've got the Kresge 5 and 10. I always wondered if they dusted off the 5 and 10 name today, would that refer to $5 and $10 items? And this was actually taken just in the early stages of World War II, as the Red Cross was just starting a fund drive here. So again, to reference ourselves, Chicory Cafe is right behind us. We're facing southwest. Studebaker Plaza is here. And you can just see the corner of the Hotel Jefferson down there. That is where all the construction is going on in downtown South Bend right now for the new office building. That's the new Hotel Jefferson site. In fact, I heard when they were excavating the site there, they actually had to remove some of the old foundations that were still under the ground from the Hotel Jefferson. Yeah, I know, we kind of had to bring this one to conclusion here, but unfortunately, the building was suffering the same fate as many buildings in downtown South Bend in the 1970s. The Kresge's department store, they were losing money in the late 60s and early 70s, and in April 12, 1974, the building was sold to the National Bank and Trust. And this was really one of the early efforts of the Historic Preservation Commission to get the Common Council to designate this structure as a landmark, and unfortunately they were not able to do so. The bank officials had an estimate of $250,000 for rehabilitation of the building, and they just could not justify investing the money in an old structure with probably questionable usage for the banking purposes. And the building came down at that time. Demolishing was complete in March of 1975 and is now the site of the Studebaker Plaza in downtown. So remember that date, 1975. Well, we mentioned earlier that Studebaker was essentially out of this building, not using it for production by about the 1890s. So what were they thinking about doing with it? Well, the Studebaker Hotel, you say. What? The Studebaker Hotel, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Oliver Hotel, but what's this with the Studebaker Hotel? Well, this illustration appeared in a South Bend Tribune article in about 1895, and the backstory for this was a headline that said the city has hotel fever, and it was dated November 18, 1890. The Tribune was interviewing J.M. Studebaker. Mr. Oliver, James Oliver, wanted to build a hotel. In fact, he wanted to build a very palatial hotel, and South Bend at that time did not have a first-class lodging facility. And planning was underway for now this is the number that came out of the Tribune, a $500,000 hotel project in 1895 or 1890s dollars, to be built on the site of the older Oliver Hotel House and Goods Opera House, which is essentially where the Oliver Hotel was later built. However, a landowner, they were trying to secure the entire block. The landowner was holding out. He wanted an exorbitant amount of cash. And the mayor appointed a committee that included J.M. Studebaker and Mayor Longley and Mr. J. Ben Birdsell, we recognize the Birdsell name, to go try and negotiate with the building, with the landowner to see if they could get him to actually let the property go for a reasonable figure. Well, the owner turned down a $130,000 offer in 1890s dollars for his plot, and Mr. Studebaker let on, it's like, well, you know, this isn't the only place in South Bend where someone could build a hotel. Why, in fact, maybe just a site a couple blocks away might be the ideal site for a hotel. But J.M. was just really, speculating as he went on to say that the Studebakers had no plans to turn their carriage factory into a hotel anytime soon. And talk of our having a hotel at the present carriage factory is mere moonshine. And this little man was a teetotaler. Well, cool. And the two events aren't necessarily related, but the carriage factory was moving out of the downtown location, so suddenly Studebaker had a building that was now available, and South Bend did still not have a first-class lodging facility. In March 10, 1894, the Studebakers retained an architect only identified as Mr. Cobb, and we might guess that they're referring to Henry Ives Cobb, who designed Tippecanoe Place, but that's not clarified either. To see about remodeling the carriage factory into a fine hotel complete with office space and a music hall. In 1896, details were released, and that's where this particular article came. We see South Bend architect O.H. Durham is credited with doing the design work, as specifications called for a maximum of 234 rooms, a second-floor dining room, and a spacious first-floor lobby. Because if you're going to spend the money, you don't want a cramped lobby, you want a spacious one. The rooms will be finished with some bright hardwood and will have an immense fireplace for up to 4 logs. Apparently that's a large number of logs for a fireplace. With great mirrors on each side, and will be one of the pleasantest places in our city. Work did not begin as scheduled. It seems a surprise to hear that with hotel projects, that they don't exactly start on time and finish as expected. For on March 12, 1897, it was reported that substantial changes were being made to the Studebaker Hotel. Frederick Fish, now president of Studebaker and also James Studebaker's son-in-law, explained it as follows. We have found also that as a general proposition, it is not a good business judgment to put modern hotel conveniences, plumbing, etc., in an old shell. So we decided to tear down the buildings on the hotel site. There is no question of the hotel being built. July 30th, 1897, there's a big question that the hotel will not be built. As the headline trumpeted, Studebaker Hotel will not go up. And I'm going to read this next quote in its entirety. Again, Frederick Fish commenting, last night Mr. James Oliver called upon Mr. Peter Studebaker and informed him that he was determined to commence building this winter a modern fireproof hotel on the site of the present Oliver House, again, the site of the later Oliver Hotel. We appreciate the courtesy and intent of Mr. Oliver, and we're glad to learn his conclusions. Our board of directors, Studebaker board of directors, after carefully considering the matter, felt that two hotels at the present time might work against each other and so prevent either from realizing anticipations. We concluded that we would probably serve the public and ourselves by abandoning our scheme. Mr. Oliver, however, commented, I advised the Studebakers to go on with their hotel and not wait for me. However, last night Mr. Studebaker called on me again, and they said they had abandoned their project wholly and desired me to go ahead and build the hotel. The Oliver Hotel opened in 1899. The Studebaker Hotel remained unbuilt and is pretty much left to this picture we have of here. And the irony of this is, the building that was going to be torn down to build the Oliver Hotel, or to build the Studebaker Hotel instead of the Oliver Hotel, actually has hung around longer than the Oliver Hotel itself, because the Oliver Hotel was taken down in 1967, and as we mentioned earlier, the Studebaker's Carriage Factory building hung around to 1975. Moving on to section number 2 here. One of the first things I remember when I took the job at Studebaker Museum 20 years ago, as Pat just reminded me, was this picture, which we had in our collection, and it says Studebaker's Foundry cast and steel skeins, and I'm looking at that, it's like, well, wait a minute, the Studebaker Foundry is over on just south of Sample Street, this doesn't look anything like it. Well, we did a little digging on there to find out exactly what was the story behind this property. We come to find that this actually used to be the South Bend Malleable Iron Company, makers of South Bend branded iron products, South Bend ranges, for example. And shortly after this picture was illustrated for South Bend Malleable Iron Company, it changed hands. Not a surprise, as there was a Studebaker or two on the board of the South Bend Malleable Iron Company, but now this was Studebaker's foundry. And the site of this foundry was not adjacent to the plant, but is actually just west of downtown South Bend. We see right where the two rail lines come in, there's a little triangle-shaped property there to orient ourselves. Division Street, does anyone know what the modern-day name of Division Street is? Western Avenue. Normally we would give out prizes, but I'm sorry, we didn't actually prepare for